technologies, so obviously care a lot about it. Box has been, until fairly recently, kind of doing it in a not the most organized manner. In April, we started getting more serious about this. We started an open source website on our domain, and then just recently we joined the To-Do group, which I think you guys mostly heard about, which is a bunch of companies, Facebook and Twitter and Stripe and Square and Dropbox and us, I think Google's in there, committed to doing more serious open source work. So we're very excited to be kicking this stuff off. We're very happy to be building, open source software that's not just kind of thrown up on a server somewhere, but is documented, extensible, usable, testable, really high quality stuff. So that's the thing that we care about a lot is really building some stuff that's pretty high quality and very usable rather than just kind of like some code that got stuck somewhere. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. To-Do is pretty cool. We've got about 1,000 individuals and companies already asking to join To-Do, which is a pretty impressive amount of interest. So we're looking forward to that going forward. So anyways, I'll get off here in a second. Paul is, according to my notes, a unicycling, juggling web hacker from Facebook. Do you know who Bobo Galchenko is?
I don't know.
Bobo Galchenko is this really, if you go Google him, he's this really famous juggler who works at Box. So it's this crazy dude.
I should have brought my ball.
You should have, yeah. He's pretty awesome. Anyways, he's a technical lead at Yahoo before this. He's going to talk about HHVM, and I'm going to let him describe HHVM, and I'll get out of your way.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a talk of how HHVM works under the covers, which is probably going to be exciting. And also a few little fun things about PHP, and then a little bit back about the hack language that you might have also heard about. That's another poll I should do. Who has heard of hack, the language, other than building a hack? Okay. It's about half the same people that have heard of HHVM. So that's actually good. Our HHVM is our gateway drug to hack. HHVM is marijuana. Hack is the cocaine that'll get you going for your actual PHP code. So I will show you, on that note, I will show you what our programming is about. So here you go. This is hard to read. Is there a way to turn down these lights? Anybody? You can work on that while I go through some of these. It should be white on blue. It should work out. Okay, first I'm going to talk about the language. That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. You run IT as well as engineering. Well done. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about a language, then I'm going to talk about our runtime, and then another language. So at Facebook, we have a lot of PHP code, right? So we have 10 to the 5 files, 10 to the 7 lines. We release twice a day during the week. And hilariously, or maybe not hilariously, but anecdotally, PHP is actually productive. Everyone thinks of it as all the little clowny edge cases that come up. But compared to all the other languages that we've looked at, switching to, and all the other languages we also code in at the same time, PHP kind of fits the bill between speed of execution as well as safety of runtime. So we wanted to stay in PHP. But unfortunately, PHP is dog slow. So we wanted to fix that so we didn't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars buying computers every day. So I want to talk to you about a few of the dog slow things in PHP. So first of all, what is the string 1 plus the string 2?
Number 3.
The integer 3, right? Makes sense. I mean, you cast strings to integers and you do the summation on that. Not too horrible. So what is the string 1 plus the string 2?
The integer 3.
Yeah, it's probably the same thing. I mean, you start parsing until you see something that's not a number, and that's your number, right? You just chop the rest off. Who cares? The programmer probably screwed up and put some other stuff at the end of the string, and didn't really want to add it together. So let's just go to 3. What is the string 15 plus the string 0xf? The amount of responses are going down.
Fatal error.
Fatal error. That would be a very good thing if that was a fatal error. Unfortunately, the same logic still applies, right? You start parsing the string until you see a non-numeric character, which is x, and you stop, and now that's 0. So 15 plus 0 is 15. Okay, makes sense. But does 15 equal 0xf? Yeah, of course. I mean, these are definitely the same string. Since obviously you wanted to compare them as integers and cast that one a different way. Okay, Now every language has to have a spirit animal, right? So our spirit animal we have chosen is the hagfish, the bottom-dwelling deep sea fish that is incredibly ugly. Seems to be apt for PHP. So what is hagfish plus 2? Well, as we learned, you start parsing. You see no numerals and you get 0, right? So 0 plus 2 is 2. But if you the plus operator seems to make a little bit of sense. But once you start ORing things together, do you know what hagfish ORed 9 million is? Random? If it called MT rand, we might have a bit of a problem. Interestingly, it's YQWVYSX. Why? Wow, nobody. This is great. I'm scared enough people away from PHP already. Just wait for the end of the talk. Okay, so it basically converts the first thing into ASCII, and then takes this, converts it to an integer, and then ORs the two on top of each other, and then converts it back to a string for some reason. This is PHP. Welcome to fun. If you increment a string in PHP, this should be well known, right? It's hagfissy. Right, the H gets incremented into I, right? That's obviously what you want to do when you increment a string. But if you increment Z, it makes sense all the way up to there. What happens at the end? Capital A would be okay. Double A is also an interesting answer, which was chosen by PHP. So, stay in the lowercase. Why not? Okay. So this is PHP. This is the daemon we were handed, and we coded, our entire website in. How do we make this fast? How can we actually get our minds around this kind of thing to actually code it up? So we actually had 3 efforts. We looked at our numbers and we decided, well, in 4 months we're going to have to shut down Facebook. We're going to have to limit, you have used your 28 minutes on Facebook. Sorry, the next person gets to use the computer. Like we were running out of computers at the amount of at the speed that our users were joining us, and the amount of times that Dell trucks can drive into our data center and bring us computers. Right, the inflection point was happening. So we had to do something. We started 3 different efforts. Thankfully, one of them panned out, which was the hip-hop PHP to C++ compiler. That converted PHP to C++ and then compiled that with GCC and ended up with a binary called program. And it ran and listened on port 80 and ran Facebook for like 2 years. It was great. It was a 2 to 5 times speed up. But the major thing we learned is PHP is clowny, but people don't always use it as clowny as it has to be. So type inference was the secret to be fast. Yes, you could pass anything to this function, but most people pass integers. So make the body of the function deal with integers correctly. So that's kind of the underlying, aha moment of how to make PHP fast. Typing. So the problem was this ahead of time compilation took an hour to compile Facebook, and if every time you changed your CSS or did something in PHP you had to wait an hour, people wouldn't be very happy. So we had an interpreter run on the old, PHP interpreter, and then we had the compiler for production, and 2 different systems running your dev versus production. It's a recipe for absolute disaster. So we started a new effort called HHVM. Let me show you a little bit of things about what HHVM uses to make things fast. If you do something like this, take a random number. If the random number is even, make a function that returns something. If it's odd, make it same name of function, return something else. In this kind of instance, you can't do any ahead of time inference, right? You have no idea what the heck the parity function does. So you can't do anything. But all we did is go through all of our code and deleted everything like this. That's all it takes. Just go through and delete everything that has top-level statements in your PHP files. Everything that defines functions inside of blocks of code, not at the top level. Any duplicate classes in this file and this file, if they have the same name, depending on which one was included first, that's the class. All of this insanity we just deleted and stopped and banned. And after that process, PHP got a lot more manageable and a lot faster with HHVM. Apparently my animations are not great, so I will jump through them all first. Hello. Okay, so if we have an array, of excitement in PHP called 1, 2, and you append to the array, you get 3. But the array semantics of PHP make total sense up until this point. When you unset one element, you switch from an array to a map. Right? You now are no longer index 0 to 2. You now have removed the element 1, but you still kept the keys of the other place. In some languages, this would be like sacrilege, right? Switching from an array to a map just with an unset operator. In PHP, it's totally valid. So what you do is you build in your runtime the ability to have polymorphic arrays. We try to figure out how you're going to use your array. Are you going to use it like a vector? Or are you going to use it like a map? Depending on which way we think you're going to use it, we create the data structure one way. If it turns out we were wrong, we switch it to the other way. But most of the time, we're right. We're running your code, thousands and thousands of times. We can get a feel for what you're doing in your code. So, all of these exciting things you can do in a VM, but you cannot do in the ahead-of-time compiler. In the ahead-of-time compiler, there's no way for you to, you have to guess. Was it an array? Was it a vector? Was it a map? How's the person going to use it? But with a JIT, you can actually, get a feel for the code and change it based on usage patterns. So, this is the other extra wins that come out of running something in HHV. All right, don't take my word for it. Here's some numbers. On toy benchmarks, we destroy an interpreter. Obviously, a JIT destroys an interpreter on toy benchmarks. But the real things are real benchmarks, right? Are real websites. And anyone that switches over to us, we just had the announcement, right? It's already been said? Okay, great. So Wikipedia is switching over to HHVM, and they saved about 2.5 times their computers. So 40%, from 100% CPU to 40% CPU, just by switching your runtime. So a lot of great numbers come out of toy benchmarks, but also real world benchmarks are what you should start staring at if you ever consider HHVM. All right. Should we go through some more fun stuff? I only have 25 minutes. I'm 10 minutes in. Take my word for it, there's some also really exciting things with string indexing. This is actually my favorite example, so I won't run through it too fast. If you unpack an array in PHP from an actual array into elements, it works, as you would expect. If you unpack a string, it returns null. Not an awful choice. That probably makes sense. A string shouldn't probably unpack. But if you assign it to a variable first and then unpack it, it takes H and A. Totally serious, run all this on your own. This is awesome. We had to make this fast. How does HHVM work? Why is a guy who works on HHVM in front of you? I'd like to teach you a little bit about what happens under the covers of a compiler, because this is what attracted me to the team in the first place. All right, take this PHP statement. $n equals 4 times $n plus 1. So first we convert it to HHVC, the hip-hop bytecode. This is actually similar to what the normal PHP interpreter does. It converts it to its own bytecode. Bytecode is a stack machine. Puts 4 on the stack, retrieves variable 0, multiplies the 2 things on the top of the stack, adds 1, adds them together, stores it back in location 0. Makes sense. Convert to a stack machine, no problem. We then have an intermediate representation, which is interesting. Compiler nerds don't like working on stack machines. It's hard to optimize, and you can't be promised anything, and you can't introspect inside functions. There's things at a function boundary. There's all sorts of reasons you don't want to work on this. So we have this thing called HHIR in the middle, an intermediate representation, which is kind of cool. It's a language that is single static assignment. That is the secret to being fast. If you learn anything from my talk, SSA is the thing you should go look up on Wikipedia tonight. It means every variable is assigned once. So the cool thing about that is when you assign back into n, you're actually getting a new variable. So you can trace the data flow through your whole program. So instead of reassigning the variable and losing all your state, you now have new variables being created throughout the entire flow, and you can say, hey, this subtree over here looks exactly like this subtree. I don't have to do all this computation. No state has changed in the middle. I can just go reuse the data from before. Or, heck, the guy did a ton of math and then threw it away. Right? Like you can watch the data flow through your program, and you don't have to do all the work. So we convert to this SSA here, and then from there we convert down to assembly. So there's x86 on the right for anyone that's excited, but this is basically how your computer ends up multiplying or adding times 4 plus 1. So this is what you end up on the actual computer. But where does this code go? Well, let's take an actual example that we got from our code. So there's a function that checks if an element is empty in an array. If so, it says hit. If it's not there, it says miss. Right? It's a cache lookup function. So we compile that over to bytecode on the right. It doesn't really matter what it is. But remember when I said before, most of the speed from PHP is in the type inferences? Well, you have to specialize what your types are. Here, the first time we run the code, that's an array and an integer. So we specialize all the code to be array and integer specific stuff. The next time if you call it with an array and string, we write a separate chunk of code out and jump to that if you passed us different type parameters. So for every body of code, for every type of that you've been passed, we make different compiles. So it ends up compiling your code many, many times for all the different types that you pass in. But we found out that people usually call their functions with one type. You always pass integers, you always pass strings, you always pass objects of this type. Right? And if you consistently stay at that, we only have to compile your code once, and it gets really fast in the memory. Cool, right? Yeah? Some nods? Got like 3 nods. Great. Because of 3 nods, I will jump through. This is the coolest part of a just-in-time compiler. Everyone heard of JIT? JITs before? JavaScript JITs? Yeah? Okay. So we're a JIT. You know what a JIT is? A JIT allocates a chunk of memory that is both writable and executable. They're like big no-nos of any security thing. Writes some code into it and then jumps into it. That's what JITs are. So we render code a little bit. While we're running it, we figure out what to write into this thing, this big chunk of memory, write out some x86, and then jump into it. And it just executes your program after we've gotten used to it. So this is how you build up the JIT. You build little chunks of it at a time, and then at the very bottom of every chunk, you jump out to the translator. So after you're all done translating, you end up with something that looks like this. So you've translated the body of the function a few times, you have all your hookups pointing in different directions, and then all of your fail states jump out of the JIT. So this is what your code looks like in memory once you're running. When you stop the process, the stuff all gets thrown away, and when you start it again, this gets recreated. You now don't have to go to a compiler's class. You're welcome. Some more excitement of PHP. This was a fun bug in 5.3. If you take 0x00 plus 2, it's 2. Makes sense. But in 5.3, it was actually 4. Go actually look it up. It's great. The parser stops here after trying to strip off zeros, and then the strt L consumes the 2 twice. So this is one of my favorites. Similarly, the int of a hex, which we went through before, is 0, but on summation, it's 10. So how to fix all of these clowny things that I've been showing you this whole time? We made this thing called hack. Hack is supposed to be, have you all seen this meme where the JavaScript book is like this thick, and then Douglas Crockford's book called JavaScript The Good Parts is like this thick? So hack is supposed to be PHP The Good Parts. That's basically what we're trying to push for. So what is it? What is our problem? At Facebook, we consistently were hit with subtle bugs. People don't check null states. People don't check, edge cases. There was a great post on Hacker News. I don't know if you saw it, maybe about 2 weeks ago when we had our big downtime. If you call fork or if you call kill and you pass it -1, it kills every process on the box. That's what kill does. Go look it up. And if you call fork and it can't fork because you fork bombed your machine, do you know what fork returns? -1. You're right. So if you fork something, don't check the return state, and then go and kill that thing because you think it's a valid process ID, you destroy your machine. These kind of things hit us all the time, and hit programmers all the time, right? You don't care about your return cases. Who cares about that? That's never going to happen. Fork's never going to return -1. We wouldn't do that. But it ate our fleet. So we keep getting hit with these kind of things, right? APIs are, you copy paste code everywhere. It's hard to maintain any of this stuff. So we came up with this hack thing to fix our technical debt. This was my life at Facebook for a while. I used to be on the PHP infra team. When you start refactoring, it looks good, but you desperately want to get out as soon as you start. Because there's no types. You change the signature of some function and everything sort of works. But then somebody passes an integer to you and all of your refactoring effort is a disaster. All right. What is Hack in a few sentences? It's a statically typed language that runs on top of HHVM. HHVM runs two languages, PHP and Hack. It is compatible with PHP. There's zero overhead from calling a PHP function between the two. The type signatures all match. And the same representation as at runtime. All of the member variables are just, there's no serialization whatsoever. You pass an object from Hack to PHP and back and forth, no big deal. It evolved from PHP, so your standard library is all there. It's all what you expect. And it's designed for incremental adoption. It took us about 1.5 years to switch all our code over from PHP to Hack. So you can have your state of the world be in a very different style at all times. It's first started with like core libraries. Core libraries wanted to type themselves so that when you call like the DB functions, you know you're getting an integer back. And they promise they're giving you an integer. So you slowly start from the ground up. And then the outsides also started. People writing end user code that was serving requests wanted to just code off in their own world. No problem, you can write in Hack. And then slowly the two ends just met together in the middle. And all of our code is now Hack. Well, maybe not all. I think it's like 99.7. There's a few like third-party PDF parsing libraries that are the bane of our existence. What does Hack look like? Can you read this sort of? Maybe? I'll read it. Okay, so the top is PHP, the bottom is Hack. The key is you write less than $HH instead of less than $PHP. Hack stands for, HH stands for Hack for hip hop. Hip hop is because it was high ping, high performance PHP. It's like a recursive acronym. Anyways, it's HH. You basically write your types out. So instead of passing in some random data, you're passing now a map of strings to strings, and you're returning void. You can't just use a variable out of nowhere. You can't just be like, sanitized data, just, the variable appeared the second I started using it. You have to declare your stuff you're about to use, which saves a lot of bugs. And then everything looks pretty much the same. You're still stuck with your $signs. Funny story, I tried to delete $signs from Hack. There is 729 parse errors, or conflicts in our parser. So once I get through all those, we might be able to drop the $. Our next project. The cool thing about Hack is when you screw up, right? Look here. We declared map as a map. And then we're trying, sanitized data as a map. And then we're trying to append into it. Maps, you can't append to maps. What's an append to a map? So the type checker yells at you. It's not a C++ error. It's not 300 pages where your real error is on line 178, character 34. It outputs two errors, the place where you screwed up, and the place where the definition was that we think you screwed up because of. So, pretty nice. Demo time. Who likes live demos? Yeah, live demos. Okay, so if you go to hacklang, let's make it bigger. If you go to hacklang.org, you will see this thing that just disappeared when I made it bigger. Okay, you'll see this thing on the right-hand side here that shows off some Hack code here. Now, the cool thing about Hack is it's all, well, maybe, the cool, slightly not cool maybe, thing about Hack is it's written in OCaml. The type checker's in OCaml. Who knows OCaml? Wait, who programs in OCaml? Okay, got it. one standout, just proud, right? Okay, so some people know of it. It's not as widely adopted. The people who wrote Hack are from France, so that tells you why it's OCaml. But the type checker is written in OCaml, which can cross-compile to JavaScript. So this is the Hack type checker running in JavaScript in your browser, telling you about your programming code. So here we have a class with a function alpha and a beta, and then we have a function f that returns a string, but I'm returning alpha. And if I hover over, it says invalid return type. And then if I go over here, it says this is a string, and it says it is incompatible with an int. So I can do a few things. I could probably, delete some of this. I can call beta. Ooh, all my hack errors went away. Or I can call alpha and change alpha to return a string. And oh, 1 is not a string. What are you doing? But if I obviously I can append a string to it. That makes it a string. Maybe let's append the empty string. Better. So now my code type checks. And found all my errors that I was doing there. You can go play in here. It's all live and usable. If I try to take a string and add in 1, it yells at you like, remember all those clowny things I was showing you about? Hack tries to ban as many of them as we can possibly find. We don't allow double $sign. We don't allow eval. We don't allow, there's a list of like 60 things on the hack documentation that are not allowed from PHP. And if you're using PHP, please don't use those even if you're not going to switch to hack. They are our blacklist. Please do your best. So for example, adding strings and integers is not a very good thing to do. Okay, so go play on hacklang.org. That is a pretty weak live demo, so safe, right? So that's the hack type checker. I want to dive a little bit, tell you what the type systems are, what hack is, if you ever think about trying to use this cool thing that I quite like. These are the types. So PHP types are in hack, integers, classes, arrays. Nullable is in hack. This was a big contentious decision we made. A lot of languages don't have nullable types, but PHP seems to like nullness. They also like falseness, but that was the line for us. We don't have a falseable type. There's a lot of APIs in the standard library that are like, we're going to return an integer, null, or false, depending on what we feel like. So falseable is across the line for us, but nullable is definitely within our realm of not being discussed. So nullable things, mixed, if you write the word mixed, that's anything. That's what everything is that you're typing in PHP nowadays. Tuples are there, so you can have some set of 3 elements that are all typed well in your tuples. Closures, you can pass around first-class functions, which is nice. Collections, there's a big collection ecosystem. Isn't it great? Array doesn't have to do everything. What a concept. So there's vectors and mapped and immutable maps and frozen sets, and I don't know what else is in there, but there's a lot of collections. Generics, we have generic support. Type erasure, the same as Java does generics. So you can templatize your classes and all sorts of stuff like that. And then there's constraints as well. So in your generics, you can be like, well, this parameter has to be a subclass of whatever the heck. So we have all this nice stuff. It's there. Go play with it. There's some interesting things that most languages never ever have to think about. Hack is kind of in a unique spot. It's a gradually typed language, right? So C++ is compiled, it's typed, it's hard, right? It's like you have to declare your stuff at the beginning, and you can't use things as you go. But in PHP, it's like, do whatever you want. A variable will come into existence all at once. And we want to kind of bridge the gap between like ease of programming and strictness of type system. So what we do is we figure stuff out for you. No other type system does this for you. If you declare a variable in both an if and an else statement, after you're done, it's okay. Right? Like this is sacrilege to any type system person in the audience. But we're pragmatic. We got a ton of code to run through, and this is used all the time. So let's just support it. So this kind of stuff is done. If you knew up to classes, we figure out like an intersection of both. We kind of like leave the quantum state decoupled between the two, and it could be an A or it could be a B, and as long as they both implement the same function, you're good to go. We do all these nice things for you as a programmer that you don't have to be as strict on yourselves as if you were doing C++ or something. Unification, blah, 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 blah. We made some decisions for you. So we take a vector and append a vector of integers and append a string. What do you think? Is that good? Bad? Does it work? Not work? Some yeses, some no's. So we made the decision that vectors are vectors of mixed, if you didn't write anything. By default, vectors are vectors of mixed. We're not going to infer your types and try to figure out if you meant an integer. We'll just let you try to do what you're doing. But if you wrote vector of int yourself, if you're like, I'm intentionally doing integers here, then the type checker will underline that part and yell at you at the line. Okay? So we try to be as lax and let you keep coding and do whatever. But yell at you when you want to be yelled at. Right? You wrote an integer, you wanted that. You're going to get yelled at if you want. The type system is complicated, but we figured out a way to tell you what the type system is by like, here's one line, here's where the type is, and that's going to be your code. The error messages are pretty nice, and that's kind of the end of hack for you. So I think we have time for. I'm right on time. We started a bit late, but I should probably make up for time to everybody else. How do we do this? I'll do questions after. I'll be here in the red shirt, a couple of other red shirts. Okay, yes, we have a Facebook table also. You can come find me there, and if you have any questions about HHVM or Hack, I'm more than happy. So after that... Oh, introduce Matt, yes. Our next speaker is Matt, and I have not read his resume. But he's a member of Box's performance team working to improve all aspects of site performance. He's an active open source contributor with more than 50 projects on GitHub, and tonight he's going to tell us about his latest project. Let's give it up for Matt.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. My name is Matt Bassa. I work here at Box. I'm on the performance team. And today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about a project that we've been working on for a few months now. It's really exciting to me. So first I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background. So we love open source here at Box, in case you haven't heard. And we have a piece of software that we use. It's open source called Smarty. Anybody here familiar with Smarty? So Smarty is an open source templating library for PHP. And it's actually really good. And we use it to avoid writing code like this and instead write code like this. And of course, you can kind of go the WordPress theme route and mix your PHP with your markup, but we're all friends here and we all know that's bad. So writing the code on the left is really difficult because you have to maintain your syntax, and if you forget something, it's really hard to debug, and it's just a big mess. So we use a library like Smarty because it helps make things cleaner, and it helps us check things, and we can do all sorts of cool linting on it, and it's really nice. So Smarty is a big part of what we do here at Box. We've got over 100,000 lines of templates, and this was taken about 3 weeks ago, so that number has probably increased by roughly 2,000 lines since then. We've been working on a lot of stuff. And so in order to support this, we've been building a lot of infrastructure around Smarty. And so Smarty has been around for a very long time here at Box, and we've built all sorts of stuff for testing, for generating code, and doing linting, and supporting localization, and all sorts of security work. And all of that has kind of culminated into this giant effort. There's a ton of stuff in our code base around supporting Smarty. And in fact, I would say that Smarty, and this is my own estimate, there's no hard numbers on this, it's probably saved Box thousands, if not tens of thousands of development hours in building the web app. So in terms of the security stuff that we're doing, we have two main security requirements for our templates. The first is that everything that comes out of our web app needs to be sanitary. And what that means is that if a user generates some data, we need to make sure that user isn't trying to inject some sort of script or some sort of content maliciously into our app, because that could end up very bad. Our reputation leans on our security. So the other thing that we have is that we ban you from using PHP in your templates. So normally when you write a web application, you have your business logic, you have your view logic, and then your presentation layer. So Smarty is our presentation layer. And we want to avoid at all costs that view logic creeping into the presentation layer. The reason behind that is that first off, code quality, we want to make sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but also if any user-generated or dynamic content were to get executed, we don't want that to impact our users and pose a security risk. So that's a big deal. So about a year ago, roughly, we started thinking about upgrading from Smarty 2 to Smarty 3. And I don't know if you guys have read the recent blog post by GitHub on upgrading from Rails 2.3 to Rails 4, but it's kind of that much work. There's a lot of stuff that's changed between the different versions, and we're kind of on our own slightly modified, not really Smarty. And there's a lot of cool stuff in Smarty 3 that we would love to take advantage of, but we can't because we're stuck on Smarty 2. So we went down this road of fixing the things that needed to be fixed and starting to get things together in order to make this transition. But what we found during the process of transitioning is something really unfortunate, and that's that Smarty is stale. So what does it mean for an open source project to be stale? To me, what it means is that the project lacks direction. When you look at Python, you've got Guido Van Rossum. You look at JavaScript, you've got Brainy, you've got PHP, you've got Rasmus, kind of. But Smarty, there's really nobody. And there's still a very large community and a large number of companies, organizations using Smarty, but there's nobody kind of driving the ship. So I'll show you some examples of things that are kind of unfortunate that are a byproduct of this sort of aimless direction. So in Smarty, there's a lot of ways that you can execute PHP. Some are static, some are dynamic, dangerous, and really this poses a security risk, and it makes it a lot harder to ensure that your PHP and your Smarty templates remain settled. And so this is a big problem, and really, if you look at the Git history for Smarty, you can see that someone was like, oh, well, we use ASP tags in our project. Smarty should support ASP tags. And somebody said, oh, well, you support the longhand PHP tags, we should have shorthand PHP tags. But it shouldn't conflict with XML tags, and so on and so forth. And it went down a bad path. Smarty doesn't have any passing unit tests out of the box. And that's because they have their own custom test runner, which is broken. And once you do get the test runner working, it still doesn't work because you have to have a memcached and MySQL running, and a database with a certain name, and a user with a certain name, with certain credentials and certain permissions, and a table with a certain name with certain columns, and certain test data, which there's no documentation for. This is from a recent commit that I was pulling in while I was downstreaming work, and they added, this is a PHP unit test. And somehow they managed to add a Z to the top of the file. And so if anybody's familiar with most test runners, when a test passes, you get a dot. And so you get dot, 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 Z, dot, 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 dot. And really, it's just a result of the code not being reviewed. Somebody merged it without really looking, trailing white space, and it's just a sign that it's really showing its age in bit plotting, and it's really just unfortunate. Here's something very PHP-ish for you. And so for those of you familiar with PHP, you'll know that this is just crazy land. But for those of you unfamiliar with PHP, we're assigning a string to a variable and then appending a new element to the variable as if it were an array, and that is a string. Now, show of hands, who here would be confident that they know exactly what this code will do? Spoilers, nobody's raising their hand. So the answer is actually that you get a new array with 2 string elements. And so this is something that they actually went out of their way for in the grammar. They could have very easily thrown an error, but somebody out there said, oh, my code isn't working. Why is that? And they looked it up, and sure enough, there probably was some undefined case, and they added a piece of code that made it do this. And any guiding hand would say, no, we should probably just make it work the right way. And in fact, if you were to write this code in a template, it generates about 4 lines of PHP to support it. So that's really dangerous. And what it means is that when you write Smarty code, you run the risk of having these kinds of one-off cases where it makes it more difficult to read and more difficult to maintain in the long run. Fortunately, we didn't have any of this in our code base, but it's always a possibility. Here's another one that I'm a particular fan of. I saw it when I was rewriting the documentation for Smarty, and I honestly had no idea what this does. The is not even by operator. And when and in looking at the documentation, I really just had to shake my head because what would it do? What could it possibly do? And the answer is actually it's x over y mod 2 equals 0. Why? Who needed this? In my 10 years of writing code, I've never had to do this. But it's a first-class operator, and really that's just a sign, like it's a real head indication that there's nobody kind of steering where the project should go and reviewing this stuff and saying we should keep it lean, we should keep it fast, and we should make it friendly to developers. If anybody saw the is not even by operator in a piece of code they were reviewing, they'd say, what in the world are you doing? So today we're launching a piece of open source software called Brainy. Brainy is a fork of Smarty 3. There's 4 things that we're trying to do with Brainy. The first is speed. I'm on the performance team, so this is a big deal for me. The second is simplicity, and simplicity means making the code for Brainy more simple. Safety and strictness. So these boil down to a few things. The first, fast and clean code. We want the code that Smarty or Brainy generates to be fast. When you execute a Brainy template, it should execute quickly. The next thing that we wanted to do was remove a lot of the junk that had accumulated. And it's not junk in the sense that people were adding stuff that's bad, but just over time, a code base needs to be refactored. And if it goes long enough without being refactored, it accumulates a lot of crap. The next thing, we wanted to make it safer. And our security team was really happy about this effort, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. And lastly, we want to make it easier to do the right thing. If a framework is hard to use, or it makes it easy to do the wrong thing, it's a bad framework. If a framework makes it easy to do the right thing, it's doing the right thing. So a little bit about compatibility. First thing, with Brainy, we dropped all legacy PHP support. Anything before 5.3 is unsupported. We also have full HHVM support. All of our unit tests pass under HHVM. We actually found a bunch of issues in HHVM while we were building Brainy, and we filed them, and the Facebook guys are so on top of it, and I believe all of them are actually resolved now, so props to them. So in terms of code quality, improving the source, making it more simple. Eval, I think a lot of people know what eval is. Anybody not know what eval is? It's a function, you pass it a string containing code and it runs the code. It's bad, because if user-generated code or some sort of malicious code ends up being executed, your server is done. And so in Smarty, there's 11 instances of it, in Brainy there's 6. And 4 of the remaining instances are in a caching layer that we're removing in the next round of refactoring. 2 of them actually are for testing purposes. Variables, it's a variable that looks up the value of another variable and returns it. Also tenderly referred to as the bling bling operator. We've completely removed it. It's dangerous magic that makes it impossible to read the code. Brainy has none of it. We've rewritten all of the pieces of Smarty that contain that code. Error swallowing, we've cut it in half. Make your errors much more explicit, so if something goes wrong, you don't try to compile a template and get false back. You actually get an error saying this template doesn't exist. Version compare is something that's built into PHP, and it has an unfortunate use case in that if there's a bug in PHP, you can use it to detect what version of PHP you're on, and then avoid the bug. But what that means is that until you stop supporting those old versions of PHP, you will never remove that code. And so in trimming the fat and kind of cutting things off at 5.3, we were able to remove all but one of the version compares, and that last one, we just rewrote the code. So this slide is my favorite. In developing Brainy, Brainy is 100 milliseconds faster on every single page on box, which is really cool. Some pages, we get up to half a second of improvement. This is taken with a sort of scientific benchmark by running many, many hundreds of times. Your mileage may vary. So our pages are very complex and very heavy, but if you use this in your own project, obviously if you're not doing the same things we are, you might not see as much of the benefit. A lot of this benefit comes from us using less memory. We don't allocate as many variables, we don't create as many arrays. Smarty goes out of its way to make everything in the world available to you, and we kind of pair that back with it, and that gives us a bunch of speed increase. In terms of security, this is a big deal, because template security needs to be a thing. If you're building a web application and you're not sanitizing any of your output, or you're using things that are potentially dangerous, your web application is going to have a bad time. There's plenty of people out there that are looking to ruin your day. So in terms of the number of ways to run PHP, we've completely eliminated all of them. All of the different types of PHP tags and PHP blocks and eval modifiers are all completely removed. Sanitizer enforcement is a security feature that we added. A lot of templating languages have sanitizer enforcement, and the idea is that anytime you use dynamic data, it will escape. If you don't escape it, you get an error. We added this, you can turn it on and specify your own escape functions, and we will actually at compile time assert that this is the case, and if it's not, your code doesn't run. Lastly, we've identified 6 plugins that are part of Smarty that are considered either deprecated, unsafe, or do some really suspicious things. We've gotten rid of all of them. And of course, if you use Smarty and you need them back, you can always copy them in, just drop them in the plugins directory and they should work all right. But We opted to take the safe out-of-the-box approach and go that route. Strict mode. This is something that is currently not in the repo, but it will be merged within like the next 2 days. I have stuff in my Git stash. Strict mode bans you from using all of the junk that's in Smarty. And so the idea is that we turn off all of the syntax that does weird stuff. We turn off all the plugins that do strange things. We prevent you from accessing variables that contain sensitive information. And we do it all at compile time. So what it means is that if you set this set strict flag at the top of your file, or there's optionally a flag that you can set on the class, it'll actually throw a compiler code. And so if you use your is not given by operator, variables, magic method lookup, that's actually a thing. There's literally 6 grammar rules for variable method lookup in Smarty. I was appalled. They also give you access to environment variables. Why would you need that in a template? But yeah, so this is available now. Is it available now? Is it public? It'll be in 5 minutes. Ben is pushing the button as we speak. GitHub.com/box/Brainy. We would love to get your feedback, your pull requests, your issues, find out what your use cases are. It should be backwards compatible with any Smarty installation that doesn't do weird stuff. So what's next? So the next step is we will be compiling templates to hack. So we're pushing for HHVM here at Box. And one of the things that we hope to do is make it so that we generate nice hack files instead of some awful PHP files. The next thing is that we're experimenting with async rendering support. So you can render bits and pieces of your template on the fly as your database returns. Instead of waiting for the next query being blocked, it can render a bit of your template and get some of the heavier lifting out of the way. And the last thing is that we're continuing to improve safety, security, optimization, things like that. I actually have a branch with a really good win that shaves another like 10 milliseconds off of our times per box. So that's really cool. But yeah, so available in 4 minutes. Anybody have any questions? Are we ahead of schedule?
Why isn't strict mode the default?
So the question is, why isn't strict mode the default? And the answer is that we wanted to make it compatible before we made it strict. So you can turn strict mode on, but if we turn strict mode on by default, you would have to explicitly turn it off in order to be able to use it with existing Smarty templates. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Cool. All right. Awesome.
That's it for the talk to evening. I just wanted to say thank you again for folks coming. Enjoy what's left of the snacks. Talk to the folks at the tables here. I hope you guys enjoyed us all making fun of PHP. I know I did. Thanks for coming.